All right, back with Motor Learning for Coaches. I'm here with Andy Bass and Kasey Crider. Kasey, maybe it's always fun to get an update. I know you guys are heading into conference play. How are the Retrievers looking right now?
Yeah, mixed bag, I think. We're proud of how challenging our schedule was, and I think if you look, there's some rankings in college volleyball and volleyball in general, the Pablo and the RPI and the Massey rankings and stuff like that. And that I don't know if they're predictive per se, but they do give you a sense for, hey, how would this match go if it were to be played? Like, what are the probabilities? And we were favored in well less than half of our matches. We ended up going 6-5, so we outperformed expectation there. I'm really pleased with some progress. I think I've done a better job as a coach. Just my second year as a head coach, I think I've gotten way more clarity, which is exciting. I enjoy that, but mostly we're excited to get into conference. Our conference is going to be good this year. It was pretty good last year, but I think there's a couple teams that have upgraded. There wasn't a lot. The conference didn't lose a lot, so we didn't lose a lot, but also everybody else returned pretty much everybody. So it's going to be more competitive. So if we've made gains, I'm hoping that it's not just to keep up. I'm hoping that we can, make progress relative to the teams in our conference. But it might just be that it's going to be a battle again next year or this upcoming season.
Sure will be. What's an example of something you did better this year compared to last year?
Yeah, so I think it's well documented at this point that I dip into the waters of variation for variation's sake, just adding in variability because why not, right? And so one of the things that I noticed after the season was I went back and looked through every practice plan that we had written, and almost every day it was brand new, novel activities, and we had every single day it was like something that they hadn't experienced before. And obviously it was my first season, so on top of that, they hadn't really gone through a lot of it to begin with. But I think there is some period. It may be 3 reps or 3 minutes or 3 days or whatever. There's some period of familiarization where we just got to get comfortable and confident with and aware of the boundaries of this activity. What are the attractive solutions? What's the attractive solution spaces, and what are the rules? How do those rules impact play? That sort of thing. And what I found myself doing was writing these practices. They would get familiar with them by the end of the session, and then we'd move on. We'd never get a chance to really dig into that and develop more powerful either movement or tactical attractors, stuff like that. We would identify, just move on. And this year we've become way more intentional about, hey, for this maybe set of training sessions, we're going to incorporate this activity. We're going to do it on the first day and take really detailed notes about how it went, and then we're going to modify it slightly. So, hey, maybe we're going to add another person here, or maybe we're going to flip the scoring like this, but it's the same activity, and by the end of the week, we can get to that activity to where we know the activity, we can get into it, and the learning is way better. So the example I use is after the first weekend or the first 2 weekends, we had comparatively one of the poorest stuffs that we got and the amount of times that we got stuffed in the country. Like we were 320 something in terms of the difference between the amount of blocks that we got and the amount of times we got blocked. So there's lots of ways to address that. We got to get better at blocking. We got to get better at dealing with the block, et cetera, et cetera. But we designed an activity and then did it for 4 or 5 or 6 practices straight. And we could see the relationship of our attackers with the opponent's blockers improve relatively quickly. And I believe it's because we did that. We designed an activity that was representative and allowed for some variation, but it was, it could become familiar relatively quickly. And we did that a number of times, and then all of a sudden, relationship with the block improves. And I think last year it would have been, okay, we need to improve our relationship with the block, so let's introduce that activity. And then the next day, it's introduced an entirely different activity about, developing a relationship with the block. And then we just were constantly spinning our wheels trying to get familiar with these things. And I think we've done a much better job of that this year.
This isn't the topic, but Andy, I kind of want to hear your take on this. I don't know, you're on day 500 of the season, and I picture just the opposite approach with the way you guys kind of prepare for games where maybe you're doing the same routine every day. Is this is this appealing? Like hearing how variable he's doing it, or like I don't know, what's the middle ground to it?
I think for us, with 9 games left and 153 down, is we are definitely leaning into the law of reversed effort, or the theory of reversed effort, which is the harder we consciously strive to attain something, the further away it gets from us. Kind of like quicksand. When you're in quicksand, the harder you try to get out, the further you sink. So we are certainly still training. I use that in air quotes, but we're having later days. We aren't doing as much. We're a very young team. Our service time, particularly with Andrew McCutcheon going down, is the average service time is well less than a year with most of our starting lineup. So with young players, they're going to want to do more, try harder, think about it more. So our coaching staff is still allowing that, but we are deliberately pulling back, so these guys don't spin their wheels as much and are still fresh at the end of the season going into the off season.
Interesting. Well, this maybe takes a little bit into the topic, allowing for more play and less structured practice. But anyways, Kasey, there's a paper you shared with us comparing deliberate practice, deliberate play. Can you take us into the idea?
Yeah, so deliberate play is a kind of I would formalized construct introduced by a gentleman named Jean Coté, who's up at Queen's University in Canada, and really one of the names that if you get into motor learning and motor behavior literature, you'll see pop up a decent amount. He's a well-respected and well-regarded researcher and professor and academic in the field. And just a few years after Andre Eriksson's famous 93, I call it a novel because it's not a paper, on introducing the idea of deliberate practice, Coté introduced what could be considered by some maybe a challenge to deliberate practice. I think he would, and the general consensus, it's more of a complement to the idea of deliberate practice, and that's this idea of deliberate play. And so it's best, I think the idea is best understood comparing and contrasting. And deliberate practice is, pretty well understood at this point. In fact, if anything, it's maybe misunderstood in the mainstream because of things like outliers and the whole silly 10,000 hours thing. But there are some principles of deliberate practice that Eriksson introduced and then adapted over time, and people who've carried on his legacy and his work have done the same. But it's essentially this idea that it's purposeful, that we're meaning to have a specific developmental or outcome goal. It's not inherently enjoyable. Typically, it's structured and monitored, maybe the wrong word, but typically it features some form of help, and usually in the form of a coach who's either giving feedback or providing demonstrations, stuff like that. And that has become a really popular model for development across many domains. The original research was obviously in chess and music, and it's been kind of ported over into sports by a number of people. Mark Williams and Ed Cullen and that group have done a good job of that. And the issue here is not that I think anybody, Coté included, is disagreeing with Eriksson and deliberate practice theory. Maybe some of the conclusions from the research that are made would be considered a bit bold, like the idea that deliberate practice hours are the defining feature of expertise. Probably more complex than that would be the argument. I certainly would be comfortable making that argument. But instead, Coté, who's worked largely in youth sport and early stage development in sport expertise, suggested that there's too many good examples of cultural practices or environments that initially involve way more play. And what he defines deliberate play as is something that comes from an inherent motivation to participate, not necessarily to develop or to succeed or whatever. It's also something that is typically unstructured or unmonitored. And that's not to say that when you go to the park with your friends and play basketball, you don't want to win. But the reason you go to the park to play basketball with your friends is because you want to play basketball, probably with your friends. And the argument there is that at early stages of development, there's a high correlation between sport expertise and the amount of play that experts had, when they were younger. And I think for me, the reason that this concept is so relevant is not as a contrast or a challenge to deliberate practice. I think contextually speaking, when you look at youth sport in particular, but just really in general, sport development and skill development in sport, socially, we've gravitated so dramatically to the deliberate practice model where everything is structured and controlled by a coach. And to give an example here, I asked my athletes a few weeks back, hey, when was the last time you guys just played volleyball? And they go, well, today we played in the scrimmage today. And I go, no, you were in practice training. I wrote that out. You showed up because you were asked to show up. And they go, okay, well, what about last weekend we played against James Madison? And go, well, no, that was competition. You went because, again, it was set up for you to go test your skills against another opponent, but it was very obviously highly structured. And they kind of got stumped. And a couple of them said, well, I played a little bit of beach over the summer. And I go, that's great. That's a good example. Two of them said, I don't think I ever have. They go, what about camps? And I go, nope, a lot of structure there, a lot of intentional development going on there. And two of them said, well, I don't think I ever have. Every volleyball experience I've ever had in my entire life has been showing up to a practice, showing up to a camp, showing up to a tournament, showing up to a match. Some version of that. I've never gone to the beach to play. I'm from, the middle of nowhere, Ohio. I don't go to the beach to play volleyball, and I don't go to the grass because it's cold outside. And I go to a gym when a coach tells me to do X, Y, and Z. And so our development model, especially at the youth levels, is so obsessed with deliberate practice hours, getting those 10,000 hours, that we have really eliminated the space or opportunity for play. And Cote has done quite a bit of research in the same vein, in the same model as Erickson did his research, demonstrating that play has huge value for young developing athletes. And he actually sets up some models, or some stages or whatever you'd call it. And I just think it's worth, even if we're just selfishly talking about volleyball here, you go to a club volleyball tournament, you ask these kids when was the last time they played volleyball on their own, and you're not going to get great answers. I think if we could push to foster more opportunities for these young people to just play with older players, play with younger players, play without coaches, there's good evidence that it could have profound effects on their development of expertise in the future.
Andy, if you ask the same question to some of the Pirates players, some of the professional players, when's the last time you played? What do you think that you'd hear?
I think it would be few and far between. And baseball is kind of a different animal because it's kind of hard to play pickup baseball these days. But I would venture that my answer would be similar to Kasey's. That being said, I do think we're, at least in my mind, I'm seeing a different generation of athletes that just aren't as varied as in years past. Sports specificity starts so early. And I think that's why what Kasey is talking about is so important, is that we need this concept of deliberate play, not just in the sport that we choose, but in other sports that also interest us as well.
Yeah, that was I was thinking with baseball players is pushing them. And I don't know if you guys do that in the off season. I mean, I know it's a whole different deal at professional level, or for college players in baseball, like, can you find a donor sport? Is that a direction to go? And I don't know, is that something people do?
If I were in charge, I would encourage all baseball players to do anything they could in the offseason, barring injury, that would push their athleticism from a variable standpoint. Go play basketball, go play frisbee golf, go play ultimate frisbee, go surfing, go rock climbing, go play racquetball. I could go on and on. It's not just from a physiological and athletic standpoint that deliberate play is important. It's more importantly a psychological perspective, because as I've said before, variation and variety is the spice of life. So everything that Kasey has talked about is so important, not just from an athletic standpoint, but from a life standpoint.
I could also even see does it go on naturally throughout the season with like ping pong and playing pool and I don't know, shooting bottle caps in a cup, or I don't know, is there ways that like people find ways to play? Is that still go on?
They really do. And you all are both in high performing college environments, certainly with Major League Baseball. People are just competitive. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be playing cards. We have we have Golden Tee in our clubhouse. You can just hear guys just rolling that ball through and guys just yelling at each other. People find ways to play different sorts of games in the clubhouse. Yes, we have a ping pong table. Other places have pools. So, I bring up the psychological perspective. Deliberate play is not only great from a creative perspective, because when we play, we're mostly doing that. And I mean this in a beautiful way, because we're bored. There's nothing else taking away from our time. We want to go do this. And we're actually our most creative when we are bored. And this is a podcast, but I'm holding up my phone right now. Our phones make it where we're never bored. But deliberate play is a fantastic way to understand that we are bored and we want to go do something. So I just don't see any downside to any of this from a competitive, psychological, physiological, or physical standpoint.
Yeah, well, that's great. Kasey, or I guess Andy, either of you, the challenge to deliberate practice, maybe I guess it's seen as like I don't know, the Bible, like it's the way to do things. So if you were to challenge it, and I'm also curious, like, is there research in sport? I know there's the chess, there's the musicians. Like, how robust is the research in sport?
Yeah, Mark Williams and Ed Cullen, among a couple of other people, have done a nice job porting over some of that research. In fact, they made, if I remember correctly, they made some adaptations to the principles of that Erickson originally laid out, and the mostly as it pertains to, like, it's not enjoyable. At one point, Erickson was relatively invested in the idea that, like, deliberate practice is not something to be enjoyed. And then when Williams and Cullen ported it over, they had to amend the language there. They said it's not inherently enjoyable, but it can be enjoyed. It's just you're not doing it necessarily for your own enjoyment. That doesn't mean it can't be enjoyed. And that came primarily from sports, because anyone who's played a sport or a team game has felt like a really tough, challenging practice where they're trying to get better and walked away feeling really positive about the experience, not bored, not frustrated, not something to be overcome, that they loved. They really genuinely, inherently enjoyed the experience of that struggle. And most high-level people can attest to that. But yeah, it's. I think a lot of it was done, if I remember correctly, in soccer. I know both Mark and Ed have worked extensively in that space. Ed's also done some rugby and some golf and things like that. But yeah, it has been ported over. One of the major things that is a little bit tough is a lot of this is like retroactive questionnaires. So they're asking for these athletes to describe their learning environment when they were developing, and it's impossible to know how, like, functionally accurate those reports are. But there's some mechanisms in place, certainly, to try to avoid that. There hasn't, to my knowledge, been too much. And Andy, you may know something, but that has started at a youth age. That one of the problems is, like, there is a survivorship bias that exists. If you get 500 young athletes and you're going to track every hour of practice, that takes a ton of work. And there's no guarantee that even one of them is going to become what would be considered like an elite performer. That's how tough becoming elite is. So working forward is really difficult. Working retroactively is easier, but there are some concerns there with the data collection. But Cote did the same thing with deliberate play. He didn't track young kids through their lifespan. He asked them about their environments growing up and how often they did things and that sort of thing. So there's going to be, anytime you have these massively long studies, there's going to always be challenges.
Yeah.
But those are the things that I think of.
Yeah. Andy, this is a impossible one, but if you're resetting the culture and starting youth sports, I guess what changes are you making? Like, how are you setting things up, kind of with this idea of deliberate play in mind? Like, how would you change the current system? And I guess you maybe just go into baseball. What would be some changes?
if I were running the philosophy of youth sport, I would first of all pull away from specificity at an early age, and I would encourage every child to play as many sports that they wanted as possible. I would pull away from parents the idea that a college scholarship is the end all be all, because if you think about it, the amount of money that you're investing in youth sport from an early age, you might as well just put that in a college fund and pull it out when they're 18. It'll all break even if they get a scholarship. But yeah, I would also pull back on the amount of leagues and regulations that we put on kids. And get them together as much as possible instead of saying, okay, we're going to pay $500 this year so my son or daughter can play in a basketball league every weekend. I would instead create open gym formats, open ice rink formats, open volleyball gym formats where you're only paying $50 to come in and everybody's just doing it Sandlot style. I'm just shooting from the hip here, but let's stop with all this structure and regulation and leagues and AAU, and let's get back to the kind of 1950s, 1960s Dwight and Mimi Eisenhower nostalgia of just people playing together. That would philosophically be where I would go.
Yeah, and it's appealing. My my daughter is 10 now and engaging in the youth sports world. And a lot of it is the commitment for long periods of time, right? Like if you're going to play on this club soccer team, this club volleyball team, it's 11 months. And beach volleyball, which is newer to youth sports, they've actually done this model where it's pay for the amount of sessions you want. Like you can pay for 5 sessions and show up over the next year, whatever 5 you want to show up to. Like, what if that was the model that like each sport, yeah, here's 10 sessions and whether it's structured or not, but just to have the freedom, and the decision making to practice when you wanted to practice versus here's the next 11 months of your life as a 10-year-old. Like it's all been set in place. It's crazy to think about.
Yeah, John, that I think you're onto something there. There's 2 things to me that stand out that like governing bodies could do. They would be dramatic changes. So I can't, I'd imagine anyone who's in a governing body listening to this go, yeah, good luck. But I think we have a kind of a bizarre obsession, and it feels a little bit American. It may be more than that, but with like being considered elite at young ages. Like we like to partition out different versions of elite. So we know that LeBron James is an elite basketball player, but we also like to know that our 3rd grader is elite too. And I don't like the structure that ends up coming out of that idea, I think can be pretty damaging. And we all know the classic stories of like the Little League World Series kids that are great. And yeah, you win then, and then very few of them go on and have like elite major league careers. I think anything we can do to step away from this idea that like a 3rd grader or a 6th grader or an 8th grader or even a high schooler should be considered quote unquote elite would be super helpful in a lot of ways. It would clean up a lot of the stuff we're talking about. The other thing that I think would be fascinating, I've actually thought about this before. What if USA Volleyball got rid of age groups? There were no age groups. And you didn't have like a 16s national champion. You didn't have a 50. Now you're going to lose a lot of money. And so they're not going to do this. But what if we had way more mixing of age and to some degree ability? I think this idea that like you get this mix of, because there is a skill to being better than your teammates and having to figure out how do I carry them, so to speak. And there's certainly tons of developmental benefits to like playing with players that are better than you and older than you. And what if we just set it up to where like the national championship was the best players, regardless of age, playing against the other best players, regardless of age. And you just kind of fell where your ability lied. And I think that's something that's a little more prominent in Europe. Like if you ask a European kid, we have a number of European players on our team. If you ask them, they'll go, yeah, I played with 24-year-olds and I played with 15-year-olds when I was 18. And it was just more about like similar levels of ability. And so I never felt like I was like elite for my age. It never really came up. We didn't think about like being the best 18-year-old in Germany. What we thought about was like, well, if I'm really good, then I play at a higher level. If that makes any sense. That higher level may involve players that are older, players that are younger, but I'm playing at a higher level, and that allows me to feel like I'm in an appropriate space, but I don't ever get the sense like, well, I'm just kicking everybody's butt. The only time you should feel that is if you're an Olympic champion or Champions League winner. Okay, you're Paula Ganu or Tiana Boscovich. Go feel like you're kicking everybody's butt, because you are. If you're Clayton Kershaw, you probably feel like you're kicking everybody's butt. But little Johnny, pitcher on a JV team doesn't need to feel like he's a superstar. It'd just probably be better for his development to play against similar, ability more so than age, and then stretch that a little bit. What if he throws to batters that are, above his level? He's going to get shelled, right? But that's not a bad development. What if he threw to batters that were below his level and were 22 and 14 and everything in between? And there's certainly logistical challenges to that for sure. And you're going to lose a lot of money because USA Volleyball has got it perfected where each age group's got 7 divisions, and we got it partitioned out perfectly where you're just going to get a ton of people who are feeling like they're superstars. And cheerleading, I think, is always the most comical. You ever met a cheerleader who did competitive cheerleading who wasn't a national champion? I haven't yet. I've never met somebody who's like, oh yeah, we won nationals last year. Every single cheerleader I've ever met won nationals last year. And I don't think that's the best way, personally.
Yeah.
I think we focus a little more on just, hey, what's the best developmental experience
until
we get to the end, when elite probably matters a little bit more.
That's a good reframing. So something I've learned, Andy, from you and from Bernie Holiday, is the idea of the spirit of a concept, versus like by the book. And because when I think of this deliberate play idea, it's like, well, I can't just not show up at practice. Like, say, yeah, tomorrow I'll practice 2 to 4, have fun. But if I was to try to, if I'm a high school baseball coach, high school volleyball coach, college coach, and I want to bring more of the spirit of the deliberate play to my practice environment, do you have any concepts, any ideas on how I can bring that to life?
You all can speak to this more than I can. I can only remember it from basketball, but have open gym times. Allow for that autonomy and that self-determination for players to go out and do it on their own. Encourage them to do other things, whether that's you as the coach formally setting up times where they're going to one of those trampoline ninja warrior parks, if you all as coaches are okay with that, pickleball tournaments. Just encourage play in any way that it looks like. And I think with high school coaches, and I'm probably overreaching here, but it just seems like where this is going, high school coaches seem to get so territorial about their sport. It's, no, this is my season for my sport. You can't do anything else. If track is in the spring and you play baseball, there's no way you can run the 4x8. Let's stop being so territorial about our sports. And John, you mentioned the idea of donor sports. Know that a player doing another sport is going to make your sport, as the coach that you are the sport of, it's going to make that athlete even better at your sport. So I would say allow for autonomy and open gym, open play time, and let's stop being so territorial and thinking that our sport is the only sport that matters.
Yeah, that's great. And Kasey, if you're going to be at practice, but you're trying to bring more of this less deliberate practice and more deliberate play to your environment. I don't know if that's the case, but if you are, what are you doing?
Yeah, I think Andy talked about open gyms in basketball, and they're in NCAA volleyball, they're uniquely prevalent because a lot of the athletes will come back over the summer, but the coaches can't be involved. And it is fascinating to me. It's extremely telling. The athletes really struggle in that environment. They really, really have a hard time enjoying open gym. They really have a hard time, even designing open gym. And it speaks to the fact that they've never had to do it before. They never had to walk into a gym or a playground with a bunch of kids and go, let's figure out how to set up a volleyball game. If we only have 8 of us or 4 of us or 11 of us, how the hell do you play volleyball with 11 people? Well, we got to figure that out. And they really struggle with it. And it's sad to me because that is the purest form of the game of volleyball. And even beyond the sport, the game that is volleyball, just going in there and playing for no other reason than you want to play. Why do so many college athletes struggle with that idea? What have we done to their relationship with the sport or the game that has damaged it to the point where there's no stress, there's no pressure, there's no results, there's no coach, there's no evaluation. It's just the game that you get to play with your buddies. Why do we struggle with that so much? Why do we dislike it so much? And that, to me, speaks to a much greater need for this concept of deliberate play earlier in life, so they can develop a relationship with the game that is positive enough that when they get a chance to do it without like all the extra stuff around it, great. You know, that they love that. That'd be a really positive experience. They wouldn't have to be coaxed into doing it, you know. But in terms of our actual practice environment, so we do something every day. We did not invent this by any stretch. I'm stealing it from lots of people who are way smarter than me, but we do something every single day. And we call it mini court. I think it's been called RE or 2v2 doubles, whatever you want to call it. We split the court, you know, usually in like thirds. We have 2v2, or occasionally we'll do 3v3. And we'll just mess with the rules. Like we'll just tinker with the rules. So we're using like a constraints-led approach to maybe get some concepts in place. We do it on a ladder system. So a little bit like, not quite Rucker Park rules. You lose, you're done for the day, you know? Or you as a beach volleyball player, you know what it's like to go to Manhattan and, you know, you work in, and then if you don't want to lose, you know, because you're going to be sitting for a while. But it's this ladder rule where like, if you win, you move up, you lose, you move down, you're going to keep playing, you know? And as coaches, all we do is we step away. We let them ref. We let them keep score. We let them come up with the strategies that we want. A lot of times we'll talk a little trash to them just to get them going, you know. But the biggest measurement for us in terms of what's the effect of this activity, the design, are they laughing? Are they smiling? Are they like enthusiastic when they succeed? And do they look like little kids on a playground? That's what we're looking for. We're trying to create this environment for this part of our practice. And it's the start of every practice. The very beginning, we just want them, and we'll go for, you know, 4 or 5 3-minute rounds. So we're doing it for 20 minutes. You go up and down, and we mix the teams exclusively. So sometimes we're doing a version where like the ability to receive serve is going to be really important. And you got 2 middle blockers and they're going crap. Have a blast trying to figure it out. There's no one's yelling at them for passing poorly. And, you know, so we try to foster that environment. It's not perfect because we're structuring it. They just have to show up and go, okay, tell me where to go. So it's not deliberate play in that sense by any stretch. But this to this idea, the spirit of deliberate play, we're trying to extract as much of that as we can and just create this playground. We turn the music on, and half the time they're, you know, just dancing and screwing around. And you know, we have to be okay with that because we want the relationship. And I think more broadly speaking, anytime when we talk about the relationship with the game, anytime we've designed any activity, we're hypersensitive to when we say, hey, let's call it and let's move on to the next thing. What's their response? If they're going, no, come on, please, like just let me do like one more. We nailed it. We designed a good activity that they want to participate in. They're intrinsically, they want to participate. They're being asked to be done with it. And they don't want any part of that. They want to keep going. If they're going, oh, thank God, you know, throw that thing in the trash bin. That's no good. And now we're getting into motivation. And I think there's an overlap with, you know, deliberate, not an overlap, but some link between, you know, the mechanisms of deliberate play and motivation and that sort of thing. But yeah, the mini court thing is huge for us.
That sounds awesome. Sounds like such a fun way to start the day. And I can imagine, like you said, the motivation, the engagement, the excitement, and even just like you said, the things that you're looking for, the characteristics, seeing people laughing, dancing, competing, wanting to figure out how to win this unique game. Those sound like you're hitting a lot of the elements. So sounds like a great way to start today, and hopefully gives people some ideas on how they can make their practices more playful. And I hope especially it sounds like we got to hit it at the youth level. I mean, that's where it's got to start, so we can have people learn how to play. It's crazy to say that, but to get people to learn how to play. All right, this is great. Thanks, guys.